wounding happens in relationship and healing happens in relationship, and you can't heal these wounds without healthy relationships. So we get pulled towards what is familiar, thinking that that is right, and we end up recreating our childhood all over again in our adult life, and that's an opportunity to heal. The number one thing that you need to build secure attachment is...
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I just had a fascinating conversation that I think you are going to love with Jessica Baum. She's a licensed psychotherapist who is an attachment theory expert as well. And she wrote a brand new book called Safe, an attachment-informed guide to building more secure relationships. And her first book was called Insecurely Attached, which you might have heard of. It was a bestseller. It was so interesting, though, talking about selfishly, I'm interested in helping clients who are insecurely attached become more securely attached. So we talked about all different ways that we can create what's called earned attachment, right? Where you can go from being more insecurely attached to being more securely attached, and how to become more aware of people's attachment style, especially when you're dating. We talked about everything. She shared her story. It was such a fascinating conversation. I really think you're going to love this conversation with Jessica Baum as much as I loved having this conversation with her. I'm so excited to welcome Jessica Baum to the Terri Cole Show. Jessica, welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. I've been a huge fan of you for so long, so it's great to actually be here and having this conversation.
I felt like I knew you long before this conversation from all the social media and the interwebs. You know, sometimes you see someone's stuff and you're like, I should know that person, or I feel like I do know that person. That's exactly how I felt about you when I started seeing your stuff. So let's talk. First of all, congratulations. Your brand new book just dropped. It's called Safe. Woo! Coming Home to Yourself and Others, an attachment-informed guide to building more secure relationships. Very exciting. I know that my audience is very interested in this. I'm talking all the time about attachment stuff and becoming more securely attached. So let's just, before we get into the book itself and attachment stuff, because I have 700 questions for you, I want to ask you, what is your origin story? You know, like if you were a Marvel movie character, right? We all have a reason we do what we do. And so do you, Jessica Baum. So what in your life got you to this place?
Oh God, I feel like that could be the whole podcast.
Sure.
I struggled with my own depression and anxiety in my 20s, and I write about it in my first book, but I ended up in the hospital for severe anxiety, and I picked up facing codependency. Yeah, I was facing codependency, and I felt like I read something that I could finally grab onto, something that made sense in my life. And anyway, further down the road, I did some healing and I went back to school, and I knew I wanted to work with people. I'm an imago therapist, so I specialize in couples
Love.
and couple dynamics, and I've worked with treatment centers, and I started to deeply study interpersonal neurobiology and attachment theory. And once I discovered Anxiously Attached, that was my first book, I was like, everybody needs to have this information. Like, I am not the only individual suffering in this way, trying to heal in this way, and also helping other people heal in this way. So I wrote that book, which was a huge success and sells tremendously. And then since then have continued my humble experience of more healing and more studying, and birthed the book of Safe, which really unpacks all the attachment styles. It has the wheel of attachment, and it's another book where I am very vulnerable as a person, as a human, as a survivor, as a recovering person, and as a clinician, and share all my studying. So, that's a very condensed version on... I don't even consider myself a good writer, but I consider myself a person who knows what other people need or want because of my own personal experience and what I've seen in my practice work, and what the population needs.
So good, so exciting, because it is what the population needs. So let's talk a little bit about early attachment patterns, right? So how do they develop? Like, let's just start there. And how can they make us feel unsafe in our closest relationships?
Yeah, I think so. When we're born, we are right hemisphere beings. So we're what does that mean? We're like these sensing beings, we don't have like a full concept of things, but we need to stay in connection with our primary caregivers. Like connection is a biological imperative. We need it as much as we need food and we need shelter. We also need connection. So depending on how our primary caregiver has depending on their nervous system and their ability to attune and be emotionally present or not, we adapt to them because we need to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so we
Yep.
develop adaptive strategies based on their nervous system and their ability to regulate us or not regulate us. And attachment has four categories, which is nuanced and layered, but they're secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. And so,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where your caregiver's at, where their nervous system's at, how they're attending to you, and how we adapt, we can develop many of these patterns. And I talk about it in SAFE. We do not have one pattern. There's very rare that we have
Yeah.
embedded one pattern. So, attachment is a two-way street. So we embed these patterns deep in our nervous system and deep in how we relate to others. And then we become adults and we start having behaviors and experiences that feel really out of control inside our bodies and we don't really understand what's happening. And it all goes back to attachment theory, which perfectly describes why we are reacting or behaving in our relationships the way they are. And it really helps you feel like you're not crazy when you deeply understand attachment theory.
Yeah. So a common theme basically for insecure attachment styles is this theme of fear of abandonment, right? Like checking your partner's phone or just feeling like no one is going to stay. So, in your professional opinion, what does it take to stop reenacting that core wound in our adult relationships?
Yeah, so the conscious or unconscious fear of abandonment is usually at the core of that. I believe in the work that I do with my clients is that we have to go back to the root. And so a lot of people listening or hearing might feel like, oh, my parents were there for me. But the number one thing that you need to build secure attachment is not love or your parents even being there for you, it's emotional availability. And
Mm,
many, many, many of our parents didn't have that to give because of their own healing or their own implicit world. So we were abandoned in some way when we didn't feel that they were with us enough. So, part of the healing process is finding what I call in SAFE your anchors, which are people who access more of a ventral nervous system, who can show up for you consistently, and that you can do the work with. It does not have to
mhm,
be a therapist. I spell out
mhm,
exactly what you need in a human because some people can't afford to go to a therapist, but to start to depend on dependable people and to start to go into the body and start to heal your attachment wounds, which are stored in the body, and how to locate them
mm,
and understand them and hold them. So, a big piece of healing the abandonment wound is meeting the wound, whatever the wound is, but we're with what it didn't get at the original time of the wound. So, if we were left alone because our parents didn't know how to emotionally connect, and many of them don't, we need to meet that with a lot of emotional connection and
mm.
really validate that that actually was your experience and it lives in the body. It lives in your,
Yeah.
what we call the embodied brain. So, not just your skull brain, but your heart, your gut, your fascia, everything. So,
Mhm.
we want to start to slow down and be with what's in your body. That's how we start to heal attachment wounds.
Mm. I feel like I see this with my therapy clients, high functioning, successful, but so much living here, so much living in the head, so much living in the intellect, so much, you have clients who are very, use intellectualization as this defense where they're so smart, but until we can get some somatic something going, it's so hard to touch the actual wounds that need the attention. So yes, with the physical part of it, I have a question for you about co-wounding. So your thoughts on this, because the book I'm writing currently is about father wounds, and you know, I was securely attached to my mother personally, and I was insecurely attached to my father. And I saw how my father wound itself played out in my romantic life. Now, for me, I know it can be lots of other things. For me personally, it played out in being with unavailable men because my father was unavailable. I mean, it sounds like so trite and simple and whatever, but that's what happened. And with my mother, because I had an incredible relationship with her always, still do, I have the same friends I've had since I was 5, and we're 61 now. Like, women, I understand, I get it. So, what do you make of healing these sort of, because I would say, attachment wise, I was primarily attached to my mother because she was the primary caregiver, but yet my father's absence and emotional negligence absolutely profoundly impacted my life.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know if your listeners are going to want to hear this, but the way to heal that is we have to go back to little Terry and we have to have the embodied experience of what it's like to have a father who's not available and, and regress into not just a logical understanding, but what your body actually remembers experiencing over and over and over again. And at the time, you need another person's nervous system. If the wounding is young, you need a lot of adult anchoring to witness probably the fear, the aloneness,
Yep.
all of the sensations that live in your body as well, and
Mm.
help that little girl receive, grieve, fully embody what she experienced, which is
Yep.
so nuanced in a safe container. And then what that does is, neural nets open and the wound is usually stored somewhere in the body and it moves up the embodied brain into the right hemisphere and eventually integrates into the left. So I explain the
Yep.
science, like I explain so much science in safe so that
I
people
love it.
don't think, oh, it's woo woo, like here's inner child. No, no, this is neuroscience. Like you store trauma in our body. We need other people. We need to
Yep.
access the body. We need to go back to the root. We need to hold, hold, hold. So, a big piece in my practice, which is a little different from IFS, but a lot like IFS, is that the therapist
Hmm.
or the anchor goes into the body with you. So I'm with you as you start to bring secure resources inside through
Mm.
the re-experiencing. And so that original lonely little girl who didn't have a father, we witness her, we're with her, and now your adult self and my adult self start to meet her, and eventually the
Right.
wound changes.
Yes.
The
So
memory
good.
changes.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And the integration, the part that you're talking about as the eventuality, where it then becomes woven into this unique fabric of tapestry of your beautiful life, like as opposed to being something frozen in time. And Jess, it's funny that you say that about the child within work because before I became a psychotherapist, I was a talent agent for years, and I was on the self-help tip, and this is why I changed careers. But if you had talked about child within work, then I'd be like, what? You're on drugs. That's nothing. That doesn't even exist. And then I became a therapist, and I could not believe how incredibly important it was for every client. Like there was no denying the importance of that reparenting work and that going back in time work. I wish we could call it something else, but it really is tending to original injuries is
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing, but you're doing it in a loving and a reparenting way. So I'm with you. I love the fact that in this book, you added, there's so much neuroscience and there's so much
Mm-hmm.
science for people to follow and understand that this is a psychological, emotional, but also physiological experience. Can we talk a little bit about, people call it earned security. It's sometimes referred to as earned attachment. And it's funny, I don't like either one of those terms only because I don't like the earned part because then it kicks up worthiness stuff. But that is what it is. So would you tell us what is earned security? If and like how can people start building it if you didn't grow up with that attachment
Mm.
security?
I always say, like, it was very much earned for me. And if you read the book, you will see how much I've earned it. So when we're young ones, we internalize people through resonance circuits and mirror neurons, and we know that we take everyone in. And if we had parents that were more avoidant or more anxious, we internalize them. And we
Mm-hmm.
go out into the world and we don't feel as secure because we didn't get enough safety. We didn't get enough holding. We didn't get enough attunement. So now, if you're listening and you're an adult, the beauty is through neuroplasticity and healing, we can choose to re internalize new people. And so part of reorienting to security is actually finding anchors and doing more of your work with them, but also the more you meet with safe people and have an experience where you get vulnerable and you regress and you relive and re-experience these wounds, you're actually internalizing the other person. So the
Right.
re-internalization of safe anchors or safe people, you start to eventually feel those people within you. Like I can sit here today, I'm completely alone in this house. I don't have a primary person around me or even in really in my life, but I have internalized so many supportive people that I
Mm-hmm.
don't feel alone in the world anymore.
Right.
But that took a lot of them being there for me as I regress and meeting the parts of me that were alone and me
Right.
revisiting those places and changing the memory through the accompaniment of people who actually could show up and be present and give me what I didn't get at the time of the wound, which was basically to be present with me and my fear.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something about that is so hopeful, where anybody, you guys listening or watching this, like know that it doesn't really matter. Like, of course, it does matter, but what you didn't get, you can shift. Like, this isn't written in stone forever and ever. And I think that, when you think about the neuroplasticity of the brain and how long we've known that exists, because for a very long time, we did not know. We thought the brain, as you know,
Stopped.
was it was that's what it is, and that you could not teach an old brain new tricks. And so the best news is that we know for a fact that you can, and that it's really about, are you motivated to do the work? And I have so much appreciation for you taking the time to write a book on a theory that is complex as hell, but making it so accessible to just regular people. Like, if you want to heal, you can go get this book by Jessica Baum, and you actually can heal. You can follow the steps. And, Jess, I appreciate you also being very vulnerable in the writing that you do, because you are a leader and you are a fellow journeyer. I always felt like I've been a seeker always, right? Just health, mental health, well, all the things. Like, nobody has it figured out. We're all just walking each other home, as Ram Dass would say, but trying to sort of figure it out. And I feel like, coming from the point of view of, this is your lived experience, is part of what makes this book so compelling.
No, and I thought when I wrote Anxiously Attached that, I had a partner and we were doing the work, and man, was I humbled because I didn't realize how much more work I had to do. And I am so grateful. I really feel like with SAFE, I can sit here and say I have the embodied experience of so much more inner security. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
humble enough that I keep that security because I keep good, safe anchors in my life and I nourish the relationships that really nourish me. And it took a lot of reorienting you know, I'm like, I wrote the first book, which is doing great, but I didn't even realize that I had so much more work to do.
But you probably wouldn't have. Here's the thing: we can't know that, Jess, or we would just stop. Like, if we
Right,
ever really knew how hard all this shit was going to be, we wouldn't write any
right,
fucking books. Like, it
right,
is
right.
such a trip down the Alice in Wonderland, like, wow, because you're not just writing a book. You're motivated, and the same thing with my books. They're all motivated by my own personal experience of
100%.
being so mind blown that I could change my life. Like, so mind blown, like, the difference that boundaries would make in my life, the difference to not being codependent is in my life. And with this last book, it'll be the difference that healing this father wound, like, what was possible in my life from doing the work. But it's not for the weak at heart. I'm not saying we're
No.
freaking great, but I'm just saying it's not. People are like, oh, write a book. You're like, yeah. Have you written
Yeah.
any books? Because that shit is way harder than it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't even know that I had a choice. Well, I mean, maybe I did. I mean, and you know what? I just kept showing up. And for those listening with a good therapist or a good anchor, if you just keep showing up and moving through the implicit, like the things that, things come up between you and another person when you're doing the work, and you have to really trust this inherent process, which is really hard for someone who's like a control freak like me. And I'm like, I want to know the formula, and I had to just keep showing up and doing the work. So yeah, I can sit here today and tell you that I have never felt more free, more content, more whole in my whole life. But yeah, it's a journey, and I wish that for everyone who reads my book, not that you're going to heal from this book per se, but it's going to be a companion for you to help you
Right.
through this journey.
All right. So let's talk about how implicit memory shapes our attraction patterns and relational choices. We all talk about this in different ways, but I'm interested in what you have to say about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, implicit memory is like you can't read safe and not walk away without understanding it. And it was one of the biggest things that I really want readers to understand is that we all think of memory, of explicit memory, which is like, that movie that we're watching in our on our brain. And I have so many clients. I had a client today tell me, I don't have any memories. I'm like, yes, you do. That gut feeling that you had in your belly 3 minutes ago when we were holding it, that is your memory. So from 0 to 4, we only have sensational memory, which is called implicit memory. And that memory is usually around attachment wounds. And that's how we store it. We store it in our gut, we store it in our heart, we store it in our fascia, our nervous system. All of that is stored memory through sensation. So I work with so many people, and I hope that when people read the book, they get it, where I'm like, okay, let's go to the body. That's memory. That's your little girl or that's your little boy. And I'm like really instilling this idea that the memory lives in the body. When we're unconscious, our implicit world, or when I shouldn't say unconscious, implicit information is being streamed all the time. It's actually way more influential and driving the show of your life than explicit information. So smells, senses, safety,
Yep.
not safety. We are driven, we're born in a paradigm that feels familiar in that sensing world. And when we meet a person, we can sense whether that person is familiar or not. And when we don't heal, we tend to be drawn like a
Yep.
magnet to what is familiar. Like you could put 50 men in a room and I would pick out the most addict, wealthiest addict in the room, and I'd be like, that's my person, right? And if you look at my dad, you would understand, okay, I have a familiar sense implicitly towards that type of energy. And so my body, it's not love. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that. I really loved my past person, but it's also a sense of familiarity. And
Yes.
so we get pulled towards what is familiar, thinking that that is right. And we end up recreating our childhood all over again in our adult life. And that's an opportunity to heal. And I really like use that as a portal in. That's not like a tragedy per se. Like
Right.
that's where I healed, in a relationship that brought up a lot of my father wounds. And so we're like magnets towards the familiar, and the familiar is much more driven by implicit information. And I unpack that because that's like such a deep concept, and it's such an important concept for your audience to understand.
It it really is, and I feel like really people are not talking about it that much because I have so many clients who will say exactly what you said your client said, right? I don't have memories, and you're like, but you do because you have sensations and you have a gut instinct and you have feelings. So along these lines, how can people recognize, right, when they're sort of pushing away the type, the kind, the very relationship they say that they want, right? Because they're being drawn towards this other more familiar thing, and this they're not recognizing. They say they want a healthy relationship, but they're pushing it away.
I smile because it's so compelling, right? Like the familiar has such an allure to all of us. I would say that anyone who's listening and they're pushing away like quote unquote boring guy or boring girl, I mean, and that sometimes is linked to a fear of intimacy. And I would say
Hmm.
that work on relationships that are non-romantic first. For you, you have an
Hmm.
easy time in friendships, but whether it's therapeutic or not, and start to build real intimacy with people who are present,
Mm.
non-judgmental, who aren't going to try to fix you, who you can share in a vulnerable way. Let your nervous system recognize that this is love, right? And so
Mm.
we can change the trajectory of who we pick through one healthy experience. And that
Yeah.
experience does not have to start out as romantic. For
Hmm.
me, like that experience can start out with I have a really intimate friend and we started to share deeply, and she or he is depending, like I'm depending on them, and my nervous system and my body is starting to recognize this as a really healthy relationship that's showing up for me emotionally. And over time, that becomes your new barometer, your new baseline. And
Mm.
you will eventually be attracted to more people who show up that way. But you got to start with one relationship first. And so if you're like, oh, I'm going to push the nice guy away or whatever, start with a friend or start doing the work or start
Yeah.
deeper and more intimate relationships in general, and start to understand that that type of showing up for each other and that kind of consistency and love, that is the type of love you're looking for, not intensity, but consistency, showing
Mm.
up, feeling safe, being able to be vulnerable, having rupture and repair, which I talk a lot about, is so important.
Yeah.
Having those things in your friendships can train, I hate that word, can
Mhm.
reorient your nervous system to what is healthy now, what you
Mm.
want.
Yes, and understanding exactly what you're saying, Jess, that, you know, for you, right, addiction and wealth
Hmm.
went like this with love.
Hmm.
And so this shit looked like it really went together. Like, and it, you don't, because it's not, we're not recognizing it. For me, unavailability and love went like this. Like I'm putting, you guys, if you're watching, you can see I'm putting my hands together, right? Of the fingers are all intertwined. And that
Hmm.
part of what this book can help you do is disconnect.
100%.
It does
See it.
not have to be like that, right?
Yeah.
So it can be consistency and love, kindness and love, compassion and love. And I think that when my clients would say, I don't know, I mean, he's great. He seems like a great guy, but like he's not my normal type. I'm always like, is that a bad thing? Like, so far, your normal type has been like trauma
Right.
bonding and like stuff that's not healthy. Or people will say, I don't have butterflies. And I'm
Mm.
like, again, I'm not sure that's the barometer that we should be going by. Like, do you enjoy being with them? Do they
Mhm.
listen when you talk? Do they remember your friends' names? Like, you know, just basic stuff to look at. But part of what you're helping us learn in this book and your first book, but it's decoding what's happening in the body, because I think that the somatic aspect of this, we we talk so much and are so oriented in our minds and our intellect and our thoughts, and like I got to be able to crack the code on this relationship thing intellectually. You know, I have all
Yeah.
these very high functioning women in my practice, and I'm like, oh God, no. It's like that's not going to do it. And being vulnerable. Nobody wants to be vulnerable. Nobody wants to feel like a burden, right? Everyone's like the hyper independence that comes along, at least with the types of clients I have, and the women who are drawn to my world. That's one of the biggest things that I deal with. So, what are your thoughts on hyper independence and attachment?
Yeah, I mean, I write about this a lot in Safe, and
Oh,
that we live in a
good.
culture that is so driven by self-sufficiency, self-regulation, super independent,
Yep.
basically we're training people to move to the left hemisphere of the brain, become workaholics and live extremely lonely
Yep.
lives. And so it's the opposite of what we need, and we need to depend on each other. And there's so much messaging out there that was hurtful
Hmm.
to me growing up. Even the word codependency was hurtful for me because I learned, oh,
Yep.
I don't want to be that, so I'll become super independent. And I talk about my workaholism and my shift to hide out in my left hemisphere and become very independent, and how lonely and how it was actually just a protector from my own wounds. Really, it was just protecting me from shifting into my right and being in my body. So, part of what I say in Safe, which a lot of people don't want to hear, but wounding happens in relationship and healing happens in relationship. And you can't heal these wounds without healthy relationships. I could give you a self-help book all day long. And as the author, I am right there with you, even with the language. But we need healthy re-experiencing in order to move these wounds and heal relationships. So being dependent on healthy people actually builds self-regulation and like you become more secure that way, but it's the portal through, it's the depending on that gets you the inner security. It's not the avoidance. And it is really hard. I remember like being so vulnerable in the middle of my healing that I was so vulnerable to the fact that I needed people, and it was such a hard thing to kind of work through. I can't really explain it, but maybe people who are listening, they're like, yeah, that's really hard. And that's part of the portal. That is part of the passage through.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm discerning and selective for sure. But I think that's for me probably the last part of my healing that came. And of course, I'm still obviously a work in progress, but was the allowing people to be there for me in the way that I always was for other people. Because
Well,
it
I think
made me
as
feel not in
therapists,
control.
as therapists, we're really good at being there for other people. And I remember like for a couple years in my life, it's not that I didn't see as many clients, and I was the client. And I really had to let more people show up for me. And it's like we also need to be on the other side of this as well.
We do. All right, I have a question that's not related, but I always ask because I love boundaries. So, personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle, and how have you overcome it if you have?
So in Safe, I talk about a relationship that I left, and I moved out, but at some point I had to block him electronically. And it was hard for me. And it was a boundary that made me regress a little bit more when I blocked him electronically. And it was something that I had to do in order to have that younger part of me show up and work through it. And it was very transformational. So I would say I'm not big in blocking. I never really understood, like, why do you need to block someone? And then I was like, actually, I need to block this energy from my life so that I could grow these parts of me up and learn to evolve past that dependency. And so that was a hard boundary, and it made me really understand boundaries on a deeper, more energetic level. And like I understood it, but like, man, I was feeling it.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. You guys, the book, Coming Home to Yourself and Others, Safe, an Attachment-Informed Guide to Building More Secure Relationships by Jessica Baum, right here. This book just came out 2 days ago, which means that you can get it everywhere fine books are sold. There's also bonuses that Jess has for you guys. I put everything, all the links in the show notes, but tell us what the bonuses are, Jess.
Yeah, so one is a guide, call it Beyond the Labels. So anybody that's been listening and knows about attachment style, I unleash the wheel of attachment in this book. So you're going to understand attachment in a whole new way. This hasn't been out there. And there's a conversation between me and my mentor, Bonnie Badenoch, who wrote Heart of Trauma, about what it feels like to move from insecurity to security. And she's just been a wonderful gift in my life, and she's studied interpersonal neurobiology for 20 years, and her wisdom is intertwined into this book. And I just think it's such a gift to have that conversation, and I want your audience to have those two gifts immediately. And also, I would say, like, I'm on Instagram. If you read the book and you want to reach out to me, every single person that reaches out to me, I try to respond. I appreciate you all. I want to hear about your journey. It's important to me.
Amazing. This was so much fun. Jessica Baum. Let's do it again, my friend. Do you guys know where to find her? So, Instagram, where else can people find you?
I have a coaching company called the Conscious Relationship Group. I have a private practice called the Relationship Institute of Palm Beach. And basically, if you put Jessica Baum into Google, unfortunately for anybody else named Jessica Baum, I've pretty much taken over. I feel horrible, but I'm pretty easily reachable.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.